March 25th, 1911, Greenwich Village, Manhattan. The corner of Washington Place and Green Street, 1 block east of Washington Square Park. It's a Saturday afternoon, a little before quitting time, and the top 3 floors of a 10-story building are on fire. Inside those floors, about 500 people are finishing their shift at the Triangle Waste Company. 18 minutes later, 146 of them are dead. Now here's the part that never quite sits right. The building did not burn down. It didn't collapse. It didn't even lose its structure. The Asch Building was advertised as fireproof, and by the standards of 1911 it was. 10 floors of iron and steel reinforced masonry that came through the deadliest workplace fire in New York's history, essentially intact. It's still standing today. You can walk past it. Students go to class inside it every weekday. So a fireproof building did exactly what it was designed to do, and 146 people died anyway. How does that happen? Rewind to about 4:30. The Triangle Waste Company occupies the 8th, 9th, and 10th floors. Most of the other tenants in the building work 5.5 days a week and are already gone for the weekend. Triangle works 6. The 8th floor is where the cutting happens. Long wooden tables, maybe 40 cutters, stacks of cotton lawn, and paper patterns hanging on wires above the tables so they're within reach. Underneath the tables sit the scrap bins, holding weeks of accumulated fabric cuttings that a rag dealer collects a few times a year. The 9th floor is the sewing floor, and it's the crowded one. Rows of machines packed so tightly that the chairs nearly touch back to back, with narrow aisles between them. Around 250 people work there, most of them women, most of them immigrants from Italy and Eastern Europe, a lot of them still teenagers. Some are 14. The 10th floor is offices, shipping, pressing, the switchboard, and the owners. Pay envelopes are being handed out. Coats are coming off hooks. Somebody on the 9th floor is singing. It's 15 minutes to the end of the week. What nobody in the building knows yet is that the room they're standing in has almost everything a fire needs, and almost nothing a person needs to get out of one. To understand why this fire killed the number it killed, you need to understand what the shirtwaist business was. A shirtwaist is a woman's blouse, tailored, buttoned up the front, borrowed from men's shirts. In the 1900s, it was the closest thing American working women had to a uniform. Typists, shop girls, teachers, factory workers. Cheap, washable, and everywhere. Max Blanc and Isaac Harris built the biggest operation in that business. 2 immigrants from the Russian Empire who came up through the tenement contracting system and ended up running the largest shirtwaist firm in New York. The trade called them the Shirtwaist Kings. In 1901, they moved into a brand new 10-story loft building off Washington Square, and over the next decade they expanded until they filled its top 3 floors. That building was not a factory in the way we picture factories. It was a loft, meaning open floors that anyone could rent and fill with whatever they wanted. No firewalls between work areas, no sprinklers because sprinklers were expensive and nobody was making anyone install them. Manufacturing had climbed up into the sky faster than the rules had, and the entire garment district in Lower Manhattan looked more or less like this. Roughly 500 people worked for Triangle. 10 to 12-hour days, 6 days a week, for something in the range of $15 a week for the skilled hands and far less for the rest. Many spoke little English. Many were supporting parents and siblings on that pay. That's the setup. Now the physics. Picture the fuel first. Cotton lawn is a lightweight fabric. It burns fast, and it burns faster when it's been cut into thousands of small pieces. Under every cutting table on the 8th floor sat a bin of those pieces, and by March 25th, the bins hadn't been emptied in weeks. One estimate put the accumulated scrap at around a ton. Above the tables hung tissue paper patterns. Around the room stood wooden trim, wooden window frames, and oiled machinery. Then add the air. A room full of fabric being cut and sewed all day is a room full of lint. Lint hanging in the air is not an inconvenience, It's a fuse. It carries flame across open space faster than any solid material would. Now the ignition source. Smoking was officially banned on the floors. The cutters smoked anyway. Everyone knew it, including management, who mostly let it go. So you have fuel, you have lint, and you have men with matches. That's a fire waiting for a Saturday. None of that would have killed 146 people if the exits had worked. So count the exits the way an inspector would. The ninth floor had two stairways, one at the Green Street end and one at the Washington Place end. It had two passenger elevators on the Washington Place side and freight elevators on the Green Street side, and it had one exterior fire escape at the back of the building. On paper, that's plenty. In practice, every one of those had a defect that only mattered on one day of the year. The Green Street stairway was the way everyone came and went, because management funneled the workforce through a single entrance so bags could be checked on the way out. That was the theft policy. The consequence of the theft policy was the Washington Place stairway door, which was habitually kept locked during working hours. Survivors would testify to that repeatedly. The doors also opened inward, not outward into the stairwell, but inward, into the room. A door that opens inward is fine on any day when nobody is pressed against it. On a day when 40 people are pressed against it, it is a wall. The fire escape was a single narrow iron structure at the rear, and it didn't reach the ground. It ended above a skylight in an interior courtyard. New York's building code of that era required a third means of escape for a building of this size, and a fire escape satisfied it. Nobody had to prove the fire escape could actually carry a floor full of people, because nobody was ever asked. There was a standpipe with a fire hose. The hose had rotted. The valve had rusted shut. There were buckets of water on the wall. That was the fire suppression system. And there had never been a fire drill, not one, in a building where 3 floors of people spoke a dozen different first languages and would have to be told what to do in the middle of a panic. Here's the way I'd put it. Think of the 9th floor as a room with 4 doors, and then check each one on the specific day it matters. One is locked, one is on fire, one is a machine that needs a human being to keep driving it into the smoke, and the last one is bolted to the outside of the building and has never been tested with weight on it. That's not a building failure. Every one of those is a decision. This is the part that turns a tragedy into something worse than a tragedy, because almost none of it was a surprise. Start with the owner's own history. The Triangle Factory was scorched twice in 1902. Blanc and Harris's other operation, the Diamond Waste Company, burned in 1907 and again in 1910. The fires had a pattern to them. They tended to start outside business hours, when the floors were empty and the inventory was not, and the firm carried generous fire insurance policies. Insurance fraud was close to a business practice in the garment trade at the time, and historians have generally read that record the way the insurance industry read it then, which produces a very ugly incentive. If your fire policy is worth more than your inventory, a sprinkler system isn't a safety investment. It's a way of protecting the wrong asset. The insurance industry itself flagged the building. Fire safety consultants were sounding the alarm about loft manufacturing generally. One consultant who looked at the Triangle operation warned about the locked doors and the absence of drills, and passed the company on to a fire drill expert named H.F.J. Porter. Porter wrote to Triangle offering to organize drills. He never got an answer. New York's fire chief at the time, Edward Croker, had been saying in public for years that his department could not fight a fire in the upper floors of a high-rise loft building. His ladders reached about 6 stories. The buildings were 10 and climbing. He said it before the fire, he said it after the fire, and in May 1911 he resigned to spend his time saying it louder. And then there were the workers themselves. In September 1909, around 400 Triangle employees walked out. That walkout spread until it became the uprising of the 20,000, the largest strike by women workers the country had seen. It ran through the winter of 1909 into February 1910. The demands were mostly about pay and hours, but safety was in there too, including the doors. Blanc and Harris fought it hard. They hired men to break up picket lines, leaned on the police, and refused to recognize the union at Triangle even after most of the industry settled. The strike ended and Triangle stayed a non-union shop with the same doors and the same policies. So by early 1911 you have a fire insurance record, an unanswered offer of fire drills, a fire chief warning that nobody can rescue people above the 6th floor, and roughly 400 of the company's own employees who had walked off the job in part over conditions inside that building. None of it was illegal. That's the thing to hold on to. Every single one of those gaps was legal in New York in March 1911. No law required sprinklers. No law required fire drills. No law required an outward opening door. And no law clearly and enforceably prohibited what the owners were doing with the Washington Place stairway. The warnings weren't ignored because somebody was asleep. They were ignored because ignoring them cost nothing. Somewhere near the Green Street end of the 8th floor, in a scrap bin under a cutting table, something starts burning. The most likely explanation, then and now, is a discarded match or cigarette. A cutter sees it, people grab the buckets, someone drags the hose over and opens the valve and gets nothing, because the valve is rusted and the hose is rotted. In the time that takes, the flame has climbed into the hanging paper patterns and then into the fabric. The 8th floor is fully involved in something like 5 minutes. The 8th floor mostly gets out. People pour down the Green Street stairs. Others crowd the elevators. It is chaotic and terrifying, and some of them are burned doing it, but they get out. Now the warning problem. Dinah Lifshitz, a bookkeeper on the 8th floor, is at her desk with 2 ways of reaching the offices upstairs. One is a telautograph, a device that copies handwriting from one machine onto another. She sends the alarm on it and gets no reply. So she picks up the telephone and calls the 10th floor, and someone answers, and the message lands. Then she asks the switchboard to connect her to the 9th floor. Every internal call has to go through the 10th floor operator. The 9th floor never picks up. That single detail is worth sitting with. The 10th floor learns about the fire from a phone call and gets almost everybody out. Of the roughly 70 people up there, including Blanc and Harris themselves, all but 2 survive. They climb the Green Street stairs to the roof, and law students and faculty from the New York University building next door lower ladders across the gap and physically haul them over. The 9th floor, which is directly between the burning floor and the one that got the phone call, receives no warning at all. The first thing the 9th floor learns about the fire is the fire. Flames come up the Green Street stairwell and in through the windows at roughly the same moment. Around 250 people are in a room packed with machines and chairs, wearing long skirts with narrow aisles between the tables. Some run for the Washington Place door. It's locked. They pile up against it. Bodies would later be found stacked there. Some run for the Green Street stairway. That route is already on fire below them, though some make it up instead of down and reach the roof. Some make it into the elevators. 2 operators, Joseph Zito and Gaspar Mortellaro, take their cars up into the smoke again and again. Estimates of how many people they carried out run into the low hundreds. Mortellaro's car gives up when the rails buckle in the heat. Zito keeps going until people start prying open the shaft doors and jumping into the shaft to land on top of his car or grab the cables, and the weight and the wreckage end it. Some go out the window onto the fire escape. It bends. Then a shutter jams against it, and then the whole structure gives way, and about 20 people fall roughly 100 feet into the courtyard. And then there is nowhere left, and the fire is at the windows, and the ledges fill up with people. Down on the street, it has been maybe 10 minutes. The fire department is already there. The crowd is already there, because a fire on Washington Square on a Saturday afternoon draws a crowd in seconds. The ladders go up and stop at the 6th floor. The hose streams reach about the 7th. The people at the windows are on the 8th and 9th. Firefighters spread life nets. The nets are built to catch one adult falling a short distance. They tear. 62 of the 146 died from falls. Frances Perkins was having tea with a friend across Washington Square when the engines started. She ran toward the noise and got there in time to watch it, and she never stopped describing what she saw for the next 50 years. Hold on to her name. The whole thing, from the scrap bin to the last fall, takes about 18 minutes. The fire is under control in roughly half an hour. It never seriously damages the building. The bodies were laid out on a covered pier at East 26th Street so families could come and look for their people. Some were identified by a ring, a darned stocking, a hair comb, a patch on a shoe. The final count was 146. Of those, 123 were women and girls, and 23 were men. The oldest was Providence Apano, who was 43. The youngest were Kate Leone and Rosaria Maltese, both 14. 6 of the dead could not be identified at all. They stayed nameless for 99 years, until a researcher named Michael Hirsch worked through census records, insurance files, and old newspapers and finally put names to all 6 in 2011. On April 5th, the Garment Workers Union organized a funeral procession for the unidentified. It rained. Tens of thousands of people walked, and far more stood on the sidewalks and watched them go by. A week after the fire, at a memorial meeting at the Metropolitan Opera House, a young union organizer named Rose Schneiderman stood up in front of a hall full of wealthy reformers and told them, more or less, that she had learned not to trust their sympathy. Her line about how cheaply the city valued a working life and how carefully it valued property is the one people still quote. Blanc and Harris were indicted on April 11, 1911, on manslaughter charges. The case rested on one specific claim, that the Washington Place door on the 9th floor was locked, and that they knew it. Their attorney was Max Stoyer, one of the best trial lawyers in New York. The trial opened on December 4th. Stoyer's strategy was not to argue that the door was open. His strategy was to make the jury doubt the witnesses. He took one survivor, Kate Alterman, and had her tell her story of the fire again, and then again. Each time she used almost the same words in almost the same order, which is what a person does with the worst memory of their life, and which also happens to be what a coached witness does. Stoyer never accused her of lying, he just let the jury draw the line themselves. He also had the law on his side. To convict, the prosecution had to prove that the door was locked at that moment, and that the owners personally knew it. Not that they had a policy. Not that the door was usually locked, that specific door, that specific afternoon, in their heads. The jury came back on December 27, 1911. Not guilty on all counts. Police had to escort the 2 men out of the building through the crowd. Then the money. Blanc and Harris filed insurance claims that came in well above their documented losses, and the insurers settled for something on the order of $60,000 more than the fire had actually cost them. That works out to about $400 per person who died. 23 families sued. Those suits were settled on March 11, 1914, for $75 per life. In the summer of 1913, Max Blanc was arrested at his new factory. The charge was locking a door during working hours. He was fined $20, and the judge apologized to him for the inconvenience. At this point, the obvious move is to point at 2 men and call it a day. There is a version of this story where Blanc and Harris are simply villains, and I understand why that version exists, because they earn a lot of it. But look at what the acquittal actually revealed. They weren't acquitted because a jury thought the factory was safe. They were acquitted because almost nothing they had done was against the law, and the one thing that arguably was could not be pinned to their personal knowledge on a specific afternoon. No sprinklers, legal. No drills, legal. Inward opening doors, legal. One fire escape that stopped in midair, legal. and code compliant. A hose that hadn't been checked since it was installed. Nobody's job to check. 10-story loft buildings full of flammable material sitting above the reach of the fire department. Known, documented, warned about by the fire chief himself, and legal. The safety of 500 people rested entirely on whether their employer felt like paying for it. That was the system, and Triangle was not an outlier in that system. It was a normal firm behaving normally, right up until the afternoon when normal killed 146 people. That's the uncomfortable version. Every gap was survivable on almost any other day. The scrap bins were only weeks old. The locked door had been locked for years without hurting anyone. The fire escape had never been tested because it had never needed to be. Each individual shortcut had a decade of evidence behind it saying it was fine. March 25th was the day they all came due at once. Here's where this story turns, and it turns harder than almost any other industrial disaster in American history. The public reaction was enormous, and it did not fade. On June 30th, 1911, the New York State Legislature created the Factory Investigating Commission. State Senator Robert F. Wagner chaired it. Assemblyman Al Smith was vice chairman, and he put himself on it deliberately so he'd see the factories with his own eyes. Samuel Gompers of the American Federation of Labor sat on it. Rose Schneiderman worked as an inspector. Frances Perkins, the woman who had watched from Washington Square, became one of its investigators. What the commission did next is the part that gets skipped. They didn't hold hearings and write a report. They physically dragged legislators through factories across New York State unannounced and made them look at the wiring and the stairwells and the children. Leon Stein, who wrote the definitive history of the fire, counted the output. 8 new laws in the commission's first year, 25 the next, 3 more in 1914, 36 laws in 3 years, covering fire drills, sprinklers in tall factory buildings, doors that open outward and stay unlocked while people are inside, stairway and exit requirements, machine guarding, sanitation, child labor limits, and a 54-hour week for women and children. The city moved too. In October 1911, the Board of Aldermen passed the Sullivan-Hoey Fire Prevention Law, which created a Bureau of Fire Prevention under the Fire Commissioner and ended the situation where 4 different agencies each assumed someone else was inspecting the building. Sprinkler requirements followed. Smoking in factories was banned outright by 1916. Then the people carried it further. Wagner went to the United States Senate and wrote the National Labor Relations Act. Smith became governor of New York. Frances Perkins became Franklin Roosevelt's Secretary of Labor in 1933, the first woman ever to sit in an American cabinet, and spent 12 years there working on the Fair Labor Standards Act and Social Security. She said, more than 50 years later, that the New Deal began on March 25, 1911. That line gets used as a nice piece of rhetoric. It's closer to a description of a supply chain. The commission that trained those 3 people came directly out of this fire, and the federal labor law they wrote in the 1930s came out of what they learned in it. And it keeps going. When you walk into an office building and see an illuminated exit sign, a door with a push bar that only opens outward, a sprinkler head in the ceiling, and a posted evacuation route, you're looking at the answer to a specific question somebody asked in 1911 about a specific locked door. None of that was inevitable. Most industrial disasters produce a headline, a settlement, and nothing else. This one produced a body of law because a group of people spent the next 20 years refusing to let go of it. The Asch Building never needed to be demolished. It didn't need much repair at all. That was the point of it. Frederick Brown bought it, and in 1929 it was given to New York University. It's called the Brown Building now. It holds classrooms and science labs. Students take chemistry on the floors where the sewing machines were. In 1991, it was designated a National Historic Landmark. For decades, the only acknowledgement on the outside was a plaque. Every year on March 25th, people gather at the corner of Washington Place and Green Street. The fire department brings a truck and raises the ladder to the 6th floor, where it stopped in 1911, so everyone can see the distance. A bell rings 146 times. Volunteers fan out across the 5 boroughs and chalk the names and ages of the victims onto the sidewalks outside the tenements where they lived, which is how a lot of New Yorkers first learned that someone from their building died in this fire. On October 11, 2023, more than a century after the fire, a permanent memorial designed by Richard Jun Yu and Uri Wegman was finally unveiled on the building itself. A steel ribbon running along the facade at street level and up the corner, carrying the names of all 146. The last of them only got a name in 2011. So, back to the question we started with. How does a fireproof building kill 146 people? It doesn't. Buildings don't kill people. A locked stairway door kills people. An untested fire escape kills people. A phone system with no way to reach the floor with 250 people on it kills people. A hose nobody checked. A bin nobody emptied. A drill nobody held. Every one of those was somebody's decision, and not one of them was against the law, and that's exactly why the law changed. The Triangle Fire is remembered as the moment American workplace safety was born. It's more accurate to say it's the moment it became somebody's legal responsibility. Before March 25, 1911, whether you got out of a burning building alive depended on whether your employer had felt like spending the money. After it, slowly, unevenly, and only because a handful of people refused to let the story die, it started to depend on the law instead. 146 people paid for that. The youngest 2 of them were 14 years old. If you want more stories like this one, subscribing helps the channel more than you'd think.